we've been able to acquire the appropriate manuals or SME feedback.
No INS to speak in the plane.
No.
I would say that she was definitely a workhorse and could take a beating, because the more AOA you have and then you introduce the aileron, it starts to create more drag on that side, and then it just rolls the other way.
So we've talked a little bit about weapons and things like that, but what is it like to just fly around and navigate? What are some systems that we're going to see in it? Because we're used to a lot of aircraft in DCS which have GPS, and is there an INS? It's not going to have the MFDs and things like that to sort of navigate around. So it's going to be a little bit of old school kind of navigation. So tell us what players can expect from the aircraft in that sense when you're just trying to get from point A to B.
Well, I'll touch on a few core elements, and then we'll let the other guys kind of dive deeper. The F-100 is actually quite unique in the amount of things that it has for radio navigation and other just general aviation operation. You have your core command radio that operates in its own frequency band in megahertz, and it doubles as your guard radio as well as an ADF radio. There's also a radio compass that operates in the kilohertz range that is not available in other aircraft like the F5. So the F-100 will be able to navigate the different beacons and different ADF stations that are set up on the range of different maps with fuller ability to kind of utilize everything that's available. There's also TACAN, and the TACAN operates the same way it does in all the other airframes, as you'd expect. You can also utilize the TACAN to find other friendly F-100s in the air, as well as other airframes that share the same TACAN. And you had mentioned the INS, and Sloan was working on the J4 Compass that effectively is the predecessor to any of the INS level systems that he can probably speak more accurately to.
It's definitely one of the earlier implementations of a slaved gyro compass. So you've got a gyro-based compass to smooth out short-term deviations that a magnetic compass would experience, and then a motor that's going to very slowly slave that compass to a magnetic compass to smooth out long-term deviations like gyro drift and so on and so forth.
Well, that's really interesting. So I was not aware of that. So then still no INS?
No INS to speak in the plane.
No.
I do believe it had a data computer, like a what they call, like a navigation computer based on Doppler nav previously, but I think they removed it because it was kind of rubbish. The kind that you see. I think the only other example in the game would be the F4s, but the F4 has an INS for calculating velocity, which is much more accurate. Whereas something like what the F-100 used to have would use basically a radar pointed at the ground, and the radar would measure the Doppler of the ground as you fly over it, and it wasn't particularly accurate. So I think they just decided to use regular or dead reckoning.
Okay, wow, interesting.
Yeah, you do have I don't know how to describe it. Like a course. You can set a course, and you can fly radials and stuff with the TACAN. So that's something you can do. So you can do all that, and you can fly arcs and things. So that's handy.
All right. Yeah. So a real test of basic navigation skills.
Yeah. It would have certainly been very challenging, for sure. Not knowing where you are at all times, basically.
No, it's an older airframe, and that allows you to recreate most of the equipment and things like that you've described. Is there anything that you're going to be missing, or that wasn't really able to be recreated in terms of the basic systems and functionality of the aircraft?
I don't think so. No, the entire airframe system-wise, we've been able to acquire the appropriate manuals or SME feedback. A lot of the stuff we actually have on paper. I've purchased a lot of physical, paper manuals from eBay that have then been scanned in and OCR'd, and then we, distribute through the team, and we utilize that information. We found other manuals online. The Collings Foundation in Texas has a literal wall of more manuals than you can count at a glance for the airframe. So one trip that we took down there, we were scanning and photographing these manuals like 16 hours a day, getting all this stuff documented. And it really led to pretty much every single core element of this airframe is represented. It's represented accurately. And with the exception of, let's use environmental control as an example, there are some things that what are we going to do with a foot heater or the heater in your mask? I mean, I'm sure I can come up with some kind of add-on that if you wanted to put a heat pad around your face, we could send a signal to that and adjust it off the potentiometer in the airframe. But there's some things that you just are never going to feel from the game. But it doesn't mean that we haven't taken the necessary steps to try to simulate that even at a core functionality in the background, so that certain elements will have an effect on overall functionality of certain avionics and other elements in the plane not being or being damaged, due to shutting down the entire air conditioning system or other elements like that. But everything that you can interact with that you would expect is modeled as, accurately as we possibly could, while optimizing performance and delivering an authentic experience.
Okay, so you mentioned damage there. Tell us a little bit about the damage modeling, the artwork and stuff like that. How does all that come together for the aircraft? What have you got going on there?
So we have a system for doing damage, and it lets us pretty easily just sprinkle effects in the plane. We have a way of calculating kind of the way the DCS does damage. To kind of look behind the curtain a bit, is to have cells where the plane can receive damage. And basically what we do is we say, oh, we've got a piece of avionics here, let's say the radar, for example. That would be in the nose. There's a couple of nose cells. And so we would say, oh, the radar is in these nose cells. And then when those nose cells take a hit, there's based on the volume that the radar takes up within those cells, there's like a percentage chance that the radar will take a hit and be damaged. And so that allows us to sprinkle these damages for each of the systems realistically around the plane. So you can have trying to think of another good example, the RWR, for example, the antennas on the back. When your tail gets hit, you could damage the RWR antenna. That would destroy any signal from that antenna. And then your RWR would be all wonky because it would be basically working with one less antenna, so all the lines would be pointing off to one side. So it really allows us to simulate really as granularly as we want, and the idea is to go pretty granular so that you get interesting failures when you actually do get hit.
I think one of our big goals with this aircraft has been simulating behavior over effect. And what I mean by that is having systems actually work the way they should, rather than simply produce the effect that they should. And it means that when things fail or when unexpected events happen, they sort of produce new effects of their own that are interesting to experience, rather than a very predictable experience every time.
That's really interesting. Really interesting. So we talked before about the fact that most of the losses with the aircraft actually occurred in training and stuff like that. And then we talked about the number of sorties that it did, over 300,000 sorties. Is it fair to say that the aircraft's fairly robust, given that track record that it has?
So I would say that she was definitely a workhorse and could take a beating. The majority of all the sorties that were flown were over the south section of Vietnam, so it was a lot of close air support and other non-air-to-air engagements. The Phantoms were the ones that really went up into the north and sprung the traps, the famous, Robin Olds, Bolo, and all those kind of things. There were other operations that also took place, that one being the most famous, but the real core experience that I got from actually being able to sit down with these guys was more constant sorties being flown. The guys on the ground were always in trouble. They always needed to send somebody in. They would bring new pilots out and kind of fly them over the combat area. And there's a great documentary that came out a few years back called Hun Pilots. And in that documentary, one of the gentlemen was explaining doing a fam flight with a bunch of new pilots and saying, here's the guy in the truck, and he doesn't lead us, so don't shoot at the guy in the truck because he's never going to hit anybody, but focus on, these sites or these kind of, enemy, whether they're SAMs or AAA. And the large majority of losses from the historical standpoint was from doing these insane close air support missions while flying into a hailstorm of AAA fire. And even though the airframe could take a little bit of punishment, they were wet wings. So fuel leaks were very common. Getting back home was always a little bit of a challenge. And most of the time, the guys that did have to bail would bail out of the airframe, land in enemy territory. Someone would come get them in a helicopter with a group, fly them back. Most of the time, those guys would beat their squadron back to the airbase and then start getting briefed on hop into a new airframe and go back out the same day. It's really quite remarkable what these pilots were doing.
That is crazy. Tell us back to the game and the implementation of the aircraft in DCS. Who takes care of the training missions and things like that? Is that an ED thing, or is that something that you guys do in-house to sort of create those instant action missions, the training missions, et cetera, so that players can get up and running and start using it?
So we handle all that in-house. The training missions are planned to be spread across, maybe 2 or 3 of the most popular maps to just give a little bit of variety to the experience. But all the training will be done in-house. We will be providing instant action missions. I've reached out to a number of popular mission creators and campaign makers, and we're working with them to provide extra content. I would like to provide some kind of skills challenge campaign that's a little bit more on the test your knowledge vibe. And we'd also, we'll include, maybe some non-historical, and maybe we'll do like a fun campaign that brings the F-100 into maybe a more modern era conflict, or even something early on as maybe you're a test pilot for an F-100 and you're doing weapon employment stuff, and there were a bunch of guys that had to go up and test the Sidewinders and test these different rockets and different cluster munitions. And we definitely want to give the player the widest variety of opportunity to download the plane, hop into some training, get your feet wet, and then kind of experience a review, so to speak, and then kind of move into more fun engagements and other stuff. But we'll definitely provide as much of that content as we can at release. I
think we're very aware that a lot of people are single player only in DCS, so we definitely want to make sure there's enough content for them to enjoy.
What's going to be one of the challenges that you think DCS pilots are going to face when getting to grips with this aircraft compared to maybe some of the other aircraft that we have in game right now? Certainly against some of the more modern ones.
I think the pilot workload in general is going to be quite a lot higher than most people are used to, especially if you're coming from a more modern aircraft. Everything is a lot more analog. You're going to have to do a lot more thinking.
And there's a lot of players actually out there that really do enjoy that, right?
Oh, certainly. That's the charm.
Manual bombing is quite tricky as well. It's quite an art to it.
So in terms of handling and things like that, have you still been able to inject the Sabre dance and some of the other idiosyncrasies with the flight model that are going to be challenging for players?
Yeah, absolutely. It still plagued the F-100D as well. Slightly better, but yeah, it's still very easy to kill yourself. That combined with if you're doing an approach and then you accidentally move your throttle a little bit too fast, and then you compressor stall, and then next thing you know, you've spun into the ground. You've really got to be paying attention, especially in those like low speed regimes. So, but I think that will contribute to making it a very interesting aircraft to learn and very fun to master in terms of flying around. And actually, when you're flying the plane, like you're not at the high AOAs and stuff, the plane is really enjoyable to fly. Just flying it around and flying low level and all sorts.
Where did it best function in terms of altitude? Was it more lower altitude or higher altitude or medium altitude? I mean, the F-14, for example, if you wanted to maneuver at lower altitudes were generally better, but what about the Sabre? Where does it fit in that flight regime?
I'm not sure. Granny, do you know what they historically did for the Sabre? I would have thought they would be flying over AAA, wouldn't they?
Altitude is your friend when you're flying an aircraft that you can cause to depart pretty much at any moment if you try hard enough. One of the guys that we spoke to was telling me about an idea they had for newer pilots where they wanted to put a kind of a Y-shaped bracket that was on the seat that the further you pulled the stick back, the less aileron input you were able to give the airframe. Because the more AOA you have and then you introduce the aileron, it starts to create more drag on that side, and then it just rolls the other way. And it's really a wild feeling, just absolutely losing control when you're so used to being able to fly a Hornet with this seemingly unlimited AOA and the burners and the power. So it'll definitely give you that taste of kind of the raw era of these fighter jets. But in the end, I think that once you start wrapping your head around the different kind of flight characteristic and how you have to operate it, and given that our peers are coming to the table with the MiG-17, and you have MiG-15, we have MiG-21, and the MiG-19, and some of these other, American airframes that fit in that realm, it's pretty much one of the most complete period-level groups of airframes that we can start recreating and trying to put together these accurate scenarios that really will just kind of help everybody shine together.
In terms of development, what do you think was something that really proved more difficult perhaps than what you initially realized? Was there some sort of challenge that you had to overcome while producing the aircraft and developing the aircraft?
Art has been a thorn in our side from the beginning of the project. Getting a museum to talk to you is very difficult. No matter how well you word it, at the end of the day, you are cold calling them and asking to climb all over their very expensive aircraft. And it has about the same response rate you'd expect. We didn't have good access to reference material for longer than we'd like. And we are still feeling the effects of that to this day. Starting things a little later than we wanted to, getting access to more than just art reference, but, research reference as well, manuals and documents and things like that. A lot of the documentation for this aircraft is not really there anymore, if it ever existed at all. And what is there is sometimes a little confusing. The Dash 1 is not enough to make an aircraft. You need documentation of how things were implemented and how they work internally. And for an aircraft this old, that isn't necessarily something you can get your hands on anymore.
So what do you do then in that situation? What comes first? Are you building kind of the exterior model, or are you starting with some internal, or are you starting with calculations of flight model? I mean, what do you do when you're starting out and you're planning and building the aircraft?
I think you start with what you can start with. You gather all the available information that's easy to get access to, you make an implementation, and then with how the research works with this and how unavailable some information is, you kind of just have to tune and change and fix as new information becomes available, because if you spend your whole time waiting for the document you actually want, you're never going to get anything done.
So when you had that moment with the F-100 that you were looking at and, you know, getting to observe and record and stuff like that, and you had that breakdown of the aircraft and there was that fuel leak, and then you got to really kind of look under the hood, so to speak. How was that an impact on the team's development processes?
That was a life-changing experience for me, to be able to be invited to come into their house and basically join their family. The whole history of that, Fort Wayne, Mr. Cutshall got access to this F-100F, and throughout the years working with the organization, the Super Sabre Society, they would take the retired Hun drivers and bring them up and kind of give them one more run in the airplane. So this whole event was scheduled to take place with half a dozen Sabre Society guys, and they basically said, you can come in and do what you need to do. And they pretty much paired me up with their crew chief, Jack Hammer, who was an amazing man, is an amazing man. And the stuff that he had done and been through, the different wars, and being a crew chief on the Hun, as well as the Phantom and other airframes throughout his career, being able to shadow a man like that with all that knowledge, I thought I knew about aviation, but being around these guys, it really humbled me to the fact that you think you know until you speak to somebody that's actually been through it for years of their life, like in their prime. And it really came down to the point where there was an issue with the fuel valve during the first flight, and they brought the airframe in, and because they're so dedicated to, you know, doing the right thing for these guys that fought for you know, the country, they were like, we're going to look and try to figure out how to fix it. And they only have so many people on the crew, and I have a little bit of experience in you know, being a mechanic, automotive wise, and just kind of dabbling in the shop personally. And they kind of gave me some simple tasks in the beginning, and they brought me in like I was one of them, and started saying to me, you know, Grinnelli, go grab this or grab that, or get this drive, or get this socket, get this crow's foot. And, you know, it was a life-changing experience to be able to interact with these guys, get hands on the plane, see how this stuff all worked. It was almost like it was meant to be, even though the last thing I wanted was for them to have to rip the whole tail apart from the aircraft. The whole experience that we got from it just connected us closer to really delivering this plane, to preserve that legacy and honor the sacrifice and the core value that they put forth into, you know, doing that job.
Yeah, incredible that you got to have that opportunity. Really cool. Walk us through. I'm not going to be so crass as to ask you specifics on timelines and things, but it was interesting that you have on your website the overarching development progress, which is sitting at around maybe 74-75%. So tell us a little bit about, are you able to meet, do you think you'll meet at least your internal development goals? And do you think you're going to be on time to release the aircraft based on your own internal timelines and things like that?
Well, I would just open up with, you know, we're all players, and we've all been around this community years before ever trying to come together and deliver an actual product. So having said that, we wanted to take our experience as the player and try to turn that back around as developers and kind of give it back to the community a little bit. It's a little bit, I mean, any real true programmer by trade will know, trying to put a percentage number on a project like this is kind of impossible. But for the average consumer that's not really concerned about how we modeled every single breaker from the electrical system or the extreme nuances of radio presets or how you might modify them or interact with a specific thing, they just want to know, where are you, what are you doing, and when can we kind of expect to see something. So the progress tracker really is trying to provide a level of transparency at the ground level, where assigning a number like 75% is as accurate as we can try to hypothesize it in our own heads. Kind of having the section below where we try to highlight every single individual system that should be accounted for, where that is. Is it in testing? Is it pseudo finished? The guys can kind of speak to different elements that they've been working on, that some are more complicated than others, but we really just wanted to provide a level of transparency that anyone could understand, to try to keep everybody informed, because the worst thing is just having these projects drag on and on for years, and get a screenshot every now and again that doesn't really help kind of showcase the effort that we're putting into this. I mean, as far as systems is concerned, I don't know if Nelson or Sloan wants to add to what they've been working on.
We're doing pretty well on that. As with regards to like our internal deadlines, we're looking really good in that regard. I won't say what they are.
Yeah, and I'm not going to be so crass as to ask for specifics.
That's a fatal mistake. But yeah, I mean, just to give you some examples, like we're with the data thing we mentioned earlier, like we're polishing up the flight model, like the radar homing and warning receivers coming to an end. That's pretty much done, apart from just like getting all the radar data for each individual radar in the game. Like adding more damage stuff. A lot of the main systems, I mean, as you can see on the website, but a lot of the main things are just done, like the weapons, the radio and navigation systems, the gun sight, all these kinds of things are just finished. So really, we're focusing on polishing the last kind of some of the important but remaining things, and then our main focus will be testing after that point. So once we've locked in all the features, we'll be testing until release, is the idea.
As far as the aircraft's release post the testing, is there an intent here for an early access version, or will it be more along the lines, as we've seen with some other teams, that it'll be largely feature complete? Is that something that you're aiming for here?
Yeah, I think, I mean, correct me if I say anything wrong, Grinnelli, but I think the idea is that once you get in the plane after you've bought it or whatever and you've downloaded it, there shouldn't really be anything that you can interact with bar the systems that Grinnelli mentioned earlier, like the environmental controls, that shouldn't function as you would expect, I think, for the most part. So yeah, I think as many things as complete as possible is the idea. We really don't want to deliver the plane before we're ready. So, it speaks to the point earlier about Grinnelli saying we were players first in DCS, all of us. So we really don't want to we want to have this plane ready to go so that people will be happy with it before we even think about putting it on pre-order.
Yeah, that's a pretty reasonable ask and expectation from the community. I mean, there's always going to be something out there that we can always look to improve and maybe reinvigorate some interest in the airframe as it evolves over time, and we're never going to know until we get it in the hands of the community, where things that were even overlooked in the closed beta testing, features, quality of life, whatever it might be, that people might want to bring up or put out there. We're always open to feedback from the community, and we really want to take their input and wrap it into the project the best we can, because we're doing this so that we can enjoy it and that everyone else can enjoy it. So in the future, as we get closer to showing some of the new artwork that we have, and we start ramping up the kind of the cold start videos and the flight model videos and that kind of thing, it'll open up the opportunity for us to try to host some open houses and bring in some community members to the Discord. And I'd like to do some small presentations regarding functionality and expectations of, how do you think this should work, or how would you want this to work? A core element of this airplane is throttle functionality, and it is unlike any airplane, maybe with the exception of the MiG-19, where the throttle has two individual tracks, and you can move the throttle from idle to full military power and not engage the afterburner. Only when you push the throttle outboard to a different track that engages the fuel relays and all the other elements that control the afterburner functionality will the afterburner light. And then you have a little bit of range on the left outboard side of the throttle where you can adjust throttle position with the afterburner engaged. You eventually hit a detent that forces the throttle back over to the right side track. Functionality of how that should be implemented, or how different players with different setups might want to approach that, is very important to me. And I'd like to try to offer every single possible way of players being able to bind their controls and set up their gear to work seamlessly with a little bit of a unique operation.
Oh, well, I was totally unaware of that. I did not know that it had the dual track system. That's really cool.
And no one makes a throttle that has a left or a right track that we can move inboard and outboard and use to trigger the throttle. So we're going to have to use toggles or momentary switches, or an on button or an off button. There's 100 different things that we've debated, and I think in the end, for hyper focusing on that particular challenge, the goal is going to be provide every possible option, and then be very clear in the manual and our featurette videos that kind of showcase these unique items that people should know about, that all your options are available to you, and you might not need to bind every single throttle afterburner option, but the one that works for you.
Post-release, do you think this will be it in terms of what you're going to be working on with regards to the F-100, or is there going to be other variations or permutations of the aircraft that you would be interested in implementing?
We don't necessarily know what contracts will be available and what they're going to say yes to, but I think we definitely want to look to the Century series if we can and fill that kind of era of aircraft, but certainly more DCS if at all possible.
So all you need now is Edie to create the Vietnam map. I know they have mentioned they want to do it. There's no word yet as to where it's in terms of where it's at in terms of development, but that would be cool, right?
It'll be helpful for everybody, because there's quite a bit of content that's on the horizon and already existing that could just be dumped into the Vietnam, whether it's north, south, it doesn't matter. We just need something of that conflict area, and it would really be quite delightful. But there's always room. We can use all the other wonderful maps that are available to kind of create different scenarios that are Cold War related, that will allow us to have fun and utilize the pairings of aircraft, like running the F-100s with the F-4s and MiG-21s and MiG-17s, let's say, when they're ready. We've done a little bit of testing with our peers at Red Star Simulations. We've done some dogfights, and both airframes perform to their strengths and are also vulnerable to their weaknesses. And when you match those aircraft up together with the testers that know the strength and weakness of each airframe and intentionally make a mistake or play into the weakness or its strength. They really both shine in ways that will authentically make combat scenarios anywhere, an exciting, affair.
Cool. So you do have contact then with some of the third-party developers in terms of this sharing of information, that kind of thing, with regards to your airframes?
Absolutely. We've tried to maintain good relationships with all our third-party peer members, and the way that DCS operates, no one is going to be able to do another F-100, and we're not going to do a different Phantom, and there's nothing that we gain from someone else not having their aircraft, put together well. And, we've tried to network with as many of these teams as we possibly can, and, just help each other the best we can. Working with the SDK from Eagle Dynamics, having been a modder for 5-6 years, is a challenging experience to kind of break the ice with. And being able to network with some of the other people that have that experience, and then we can share our experience a little bit, and it just makes DCS better all around. And I think that the more that we can help each other, the more modules everybody sells, the better off DCS is, and it's just the right thing to do.
We've seen teams like Heatblur do some really cool stuff with release of aircraft. We saw them, releasing T-shirts and, music and things like that. Do you guys have any plans to do anything more with your release, just to embellish the aircraft's introduction to the game?
Absolutely, we do. We are going to have some really interesting things that will come with the release, and hopefully with the pre-order. Being a musician myself for many years, music is an important element, I think, to any kind of game experience. So we've put some effort into the menu music, and I was definitely inspired by Heatblur's decision to try to provide an official soundtrack for their modules. I think that's a wonderful idea, and it's definitely something that we would like to also try to provide. As far as extra items that aren't particularly DCS related, I have a few ideas that I think some of the more diehard fans of the F-100 will really appreciate, and some of the merch is going to be limited in availability for the F-100 release, but we definitely have ideas of how to capture and promote the work that we've done in a more tangible way that the collector types can get a kick out of and try to enjoy.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, and I just want to thank all of you for coming in today from Grinnelli Designs. It's been an absolute pleasure, and getting to learn a little bit more about this aircraft, getting to learn a little bit more about the team and the effort going into producing this fantastic aircraft. So I wish you guys all the best, and hope we can stay in touch. Maybe we can do something again in the near future. We will, I guess we'll be in touch. Thanks again, Grinnelli.
Well, thank you for your time, and we really enjoy your content, and keep up the good work with everything that you do, and we're happy to be here, and thank you for taking the time with us.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.